He started the live stream for the wrong reason. Not for likes, not for clout, not even because he thought the world needed to see what was about to happen. He hit the red button because his hand shook so badly he was afraid he would miss a single second of proof that would either save him from a nightmare or cement it. The little LED blinked live, a cold green dot in the corner of his screen, and the kitchen light flared in the glass behind him like a signal flare. "My name is Jonah Reyes," he said to the phone, like a prayer and a confession at once. He'd said it every night for 20 years, in the army, under starlit tents, in hearings where men in suits wanted to cut his life into neat verdicts. It steadied him. Today, it steadied the camera. He set the phone on the counter, propped by a ceramic mug with a chipped rim, and the angle caught the living room, his daughter's baseball glove on the couch, a stack of unpaid HOA letters by the door, the rifle case leaning against the wall like a shadow he never expected to have to explain. He told the audience, "If you see me go dark, call 911. And then, because that was the kind of man he was, he said, "If anything happens to me, get the footage to my lawyer." The comments poured in. Friends, a handful of neighbors, strangers who loved the smell of a good confrontation. Jonah read a couple aloud. He wanted witnesses. He wanted his voice to echo back at him, to hold him accountable, because when uncertainty sits on your chest, witnesses become oxygen. They came at 2:30. 3 black SUVs, too many for any legitimate HOA issue, rolled down his cul-de-sac like predators. Men in polo shirts and khakis, which was the HOA uniform for men whose power never had to prove itself, marched toward his house with clipboards, radios clipped at their belts, sunglasses like shields. They carried themselves like deputies until you looked too close. Then you'd see the cheap earpieces, the mismatched belt holsters, the way their badges were laminated on cheap lanyards. Jonah felt his stomach drop. HOA, he thought. But this was not a woman by a mailbox scolding for barking. This looked like a raid on a sitcom set. He opened the front door before they knocked. The sunlight unpeeled the gloss off their sunglasses, and for the first time, Jonah let himself look them in the eye. The nearest man cleared his throat and said, "Mr. Reyes, HOA security. We need to inspect certain licensed items on your property." He smiled, the smile of a man trying to buy time. "Licensed items?" "Firearms," he said, loud enough for the live stream to pick up. "We received an anonymous complaint. We're authorized under the community code to..." "To what?" Jonah's voice stayed steady, but the phone's close-up made his jaw look like it could fracture. "To trespass? To take possession of..." "We're with the community enforcement," he said, his words carefully shaped around legal-sounding nouns. "We have authority to ensure the safe storage of weapons on private property for the safety of residents." A chorus of voices online answered in real time. "Ask for ID! Call the sheriff! Don't open the case!" Jonah could see their names and little flags pop up like beacons. Daniel, Maria, Aaron from 2 houses down. They were the witnesses he needed. "Do you have a warrant?" Jonah asked. No one ever carries a warrant to a surprise inspection, he thought numbly, because a warrant would be honest. It would have a stamp and a paper trail and a courthouse signature. The hole in their story yawned wide. "We have a directive," said the man with the laminated badge. He reached to his belt and produced a rectangle of plastic, not so much a badge as a visitor pass pinned to a lanyard that said in block capital letters, HOA Security. It flashed under the sun like a joke. "From who?" asked Jonah. They didn't answer. Instead, the tallest of them, soft jaw, hands like hammers, stepped forward and said, "We're asking you to cooperate. If you're uncooperative, we will remove the weapons for storage until this matter is resolved." "Remove the weapons?" Jonah repeated slowly. The word was heavy, like a swinging gate about to hit him in the ribs. His daughter, Maddie, was at school. His ex-wife lived 2 towns over. The rifle in the case was his father's, a legacy wrapped in a burlap bag and a photograph that had once lived in a shoebox. It had been a promise, a memory, the only thing left from the man who taught Jonah to shoot straight and to keep his hands steady. "Do you have my permission to enter?" Jonah asked. They took 1 step onto his porch as if it were their right. The tallest man reached toward the door. Jonah didn't look like a hero that day. He looked like a man on the edge of losing roots, a man who kept a gun in a case in a house that had once sheltered him from storms. He thought about the others who lived on the street, about the old woman who kept heirloom tomatoes in the garden, about the college kid who hammered out beats under the window. He thought about accountability, about records, about what happens when small institutions get a taste for power. "Do you mind stepping back? This house is private property." They stepped back, but the man's hand hovered like it could strike the key to a new life. He could have called the sheriff. He could have shouted. Instead, Jonah reached for the rifle case, unzipped it with fingers that had been built by years of discipline and dirt and work, and set it upright on the kitchen table like a surrender and a dare. "Do not touch my property. I am recording. This is live. You will be caught on camera. The community will know who you are." It should have been enough. It should have toppled their resolve, but their faces hardened. The tallest man had a smile that was all teeth and no humor. "We have a protocol," he said. "We can secure these items until the investigation is complete." My heart stuttered as I read it in the comments as Jonah's voice thickened. "Investigation of what? Who filed the complaint?" "You were reported. Multiple neighbors complained about safety risks." At that precise moment, a neighbor opened his own door and walked out barefoot, coffee in hand, because the scene had become a public spectacle. He was an old man who fought for the Little League decades ago. His name was Hank, and his shirt smelled of pie. He squinted at the SUVs and then at Jonah. "What in God's name is this?" he barked. Hank came onto the porch like a small god. He read the men like a grocery list. "You fellas got a warrant?" he commanded. The man with the laminated badge blinked as if the question had shorted his script. "We have directives. Directives don't make you deputies," Hank said. He looked at Jonah and winked, which was his way of saying he trusted him. Hank reached into his pocket and pulled an old cell phone and hit redial. I could hear a faint ring in the background. Someone somewhere was hearing the word HOA raid, and a neighbor was calling the sheriff. The men swiveled toward the driveway, toward their vehicles, like animals whose cover was gone. One of them muttered into his radio, and his voice trembled, either in indecision or because he hadn't rehearsed for the kind of person who didn't fold. They left as quickly as they had arrived, as if the sun had cut the lines of a puppet. Jonah exhaled. He sat back down. The live stream hummed. The comments were a choir. Relief flooded him like a tide. He should have let it be, but what the men had tried to do lodged in him like a burr. Something about the lightning in their eyes made Jonah feel foolish for thinking the world learned from truth. The next night they came back, a little smarter, a little more careful. They didn't bring SUVs this time, 2 sedans. They arrived in the dark, and they moved like men who had rehearsed their feat. One knocked at his door wearing a business jacket and a smile. "Mr. Reyes, my name's Mark. I'm here as part of an audit. We need to check the serial numbers of firearms for safety compliance."
Jonah didn't fall for it. He had learned patience, like you learn to stand in a rain that never ends. "Show me your credentials." Mark's smile widened until it reached a point. "We don't show credentials for audits. It's community policy." Huh. Jonah's laugh sounded like gravel. "Community policy doesn't legalize theft." Mark's jaw twitched. He wasn't expecting this. He hadn't been told how to handle someone who refused to let a lie be the last thing he remembered. "Mr. Reyes," Mark said again, in the kind, civil voice of a man who'd practiced apologies into instruments. "This will be faster if we can just check." "You're not taking anything," Jonah said. "Get off my property." He closed the door with an exaggerated finality and walked to the back of the house where the backyard camera angled at the gate. He checked the feed, just like a hammer checks a nail, and put the phone on live again. The online crowd flooded back. The flame of attention warmed around him. They didn't come in force anymore. They learned to be coy, to use language like smoke, to get neighbors to open their doors on instigations. The HOA in this town was a group of people who had learned that authority could be mimicked. They learned they could borrow the shape of power and borrow its breath. Jonah began to piece together their pattern, a whisper here, a rumor there, thin threads of complaints stitched into a tapestry. He realized the HOA's real war wasn't on dangerous weapons. They had men who held grudges, who wanted to flex influence over someone who refused to kowtow. The first clue was a neighbor named Liza, who once owed him a favor he'd never collected. Liza let slip in the comments that she'd seen a paper slip under her mailbox with the words "anonymous concern" and a list of properties. Jonah asked for a picture. She posted it, a cheap flyer, photocopied, stamped with the HOA logo and the words "Community Safety Review" and a hand-printed phone number. Jonah ran the number. It connected to voicemail with a recorded message rehearsed to soothe. Jonah took a breath, bent toward the camera, and said, "They tried to take my guns. They tried to pretend they were cops. They came to my house. Tonight I'm going to prove who they are. Not with anger, but with records." He threw himself at it with the methodical mania of men who have been trained to find truth in paperwork. He spent nights in the local library, under the glare of fluorescent lights, reading the HOA bylaws like they were scripture. He talked to former board members like they were priests. He filed Freedom of Information requests until the clerk at the county office learned his name and rewrote it in a tone that suggested both respect and slight irritation. He found something. The HOA had created a subsidiary, a security council, that didn't exist in any legal registry. It was a shell, a name on a brochure, a group of men who had printed badges and lanyards and learned to speak like officials. Jonah found receipts for bulk lanyards purchased at a discount store, badges printed with a free online template, a P.O. box rented under a neighbor's old business name. He traced payments through a chain of shell companies that pinged off the radar like minnows in a pond. The deeper he dug, the more he realized the conspiracy wasn't organized crime. This was suburban theater. Men who had felt powerless in marriages or jobs had found a stage where power could be rehearsed. They had learned to harass people into bending by pretending to be something they were not. The law would eat them alive if they were exposed. But law needs evidence. Evidence needs witnesses. Witnesses need courage. So Jonah made witnesses. He laminated truth into thousands of digital pixels and hours of footage. He reached out to a local investigative reporter named Saira Patel, who wrote for the city paper. Saira had eyes like a hawk and the appetite of a terrier. She answered the live stream and asked Jonah to come in the morning. Jonah met her at the diner with his laptop and the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of the morning rush. He spilled his files like a confession. Receipts, P.O. boxes, the flyer Liza had scanned, video of men taking notes at his neighbor's porch. Saira's face became a map as she traced the lines. "You have anything linking the men to the HOA board?" she asked. "I have names," Jonah said. "Not on the books, but in the neighborhood. A PTA president, a youth baseball coach, a guy who fixes fences for a living. They move like a joke until someone takes it seriously." Saira's fingers moved like a midwife. She called in favors, a list of journalists turned into a chain that could snag an institution with one sharp tug. By the end of the week, they had a column in the paper. "Phony enforcement, when HOA security goes too far." It was a headline that tasted like vindication. The story printed their photos, grainy, yes, but aligned with the men who had come for Jonah. And the community read it over breakfast and in break rooms and at PTA meetings. Posts on neighborhood forums lit up like mosquitoes. The men lost power when light hits the rot. But they didn't go quietly. When the article ran, their harassment escalated. It always does when a play turns into a tragedy. They filed complaints about Jonah's property taxes, tried to get restraining orders based on concocted threats. Someone painted slurs on his mailbox under the cover of night. The men tried to turn the yard of truth into a house of mirrors, yet each attempt left a footprint,
a camera angle, a store employee who remembered selling spray paint at the time, a restaurant receipt placed within reach of a phone. Jonah collected these like a miser hoards coins. He also learned that exposure came with costs. Cyrus Column had placed him under a harsh light too. Some neighbors whispered, asking why he kept guns at all. The men wanted to turn the narrative into his failure. They wanted to say he was unstable, that he hoarded weapons in a children's street. Jonah had to balance being a good neighbor with being a man who refused persecution. He attended HOA meetings now not to growl, but to hold a map and a microphone. He didn't shout. He asked questions that cut like scalpels. Who authorized the Security Council? Where are their records? The board shuffled and answered with paper-thin justifications. He recorded it. Everything culminated one evening when, fed up and careful and furious in the same heartbeat, Jonah decided to invite the town in. He announced a live town hall on his channel. Come see the evidence, see the receipts, see the men who masqueraded as deputies. He invited Syra, he invited Hank, he invited anyone who wanted to watch a community reclaim itself. They came in droves. The live stream hit numbers Jonah hadn't seen unless he had been counting medals. Cameras from local television stations set up on his lawn. The men, cornered by the article, humiliated by the glare, sent Mark, the man with the pointy smile, to speak for them. Mark arrived with a camera of his own. One of the men always records, because in their world, the first story meant truth. Jonah walked the crowd through the documents like a conductor bringing people through a symphony of evidence. He showed receipts, recorded phone calls where men coached each other on how to handle non-compliant residents, the laminated badges that turned out to be from a discount printing shop, and the P.O. box with the name of a builder who had sold his company last decade. Syra held up a copy of the paper. On the second screen, the live chat scrolled like a river. People from other towns wrote, "This is what we thought happened to our uncle." A woman in Georgia wrote that her HOA had tried the same. The pattern became a thread. They were not just Jonah's enemies, they were a symptom. Everything was going well until Mark took the microphone. He walked up onto the porch and leaned into the camera like a man who believed in the sanctity of his own performance. The HOA has limited authority, but when safety is at risk, we have community obligations. Mr. Reyes didn't understand that. We were only trying to make the neighborhood safer. An old woman named Norma stood up. She had a voice that organized bake sales and school plays. "Safety my foot," she said. "You came here with phony badges and tried to take a man's property. Who do you think you are?"
Mark smiled like a viper. "We are volunteers," he said. "Volunteers who saw a danger and stepped up." "Volunteers who step on people's rights," Jonah said. The exchange heated quickly. Accusations flew. The men tried to play the victim and evaporate their culpability in the steam of community concern. Some on the lawn argued for forgiveness. Others wanted a police escort to take them away, to see the breaks of their performance finally unclipped. Then the impossible happened. Someone in the crowd had been recording. An amateur who had followed Jonah's live stream and had sat in the background like a patient sniper of truth. They had footage of the men arriving at Jonah's house the first time, of a man with a lanyard and a counterfeit badge. The footage had audio. The man on the recording had been coached, had been told, "Tell them we're with the council. Tell them we can store the weapons." The words were clear, like a confession under a street lamp. Mark's face paled. He had a moment, one of the first real human moments he'd been denied. He stepped backward into the porch and looked at his friends who looked back at him like they had been given the script of their lives and now the lines had been stolen. A woman near him clutched at his sleeve and mouthed, "What now?" You expose a lie publicly, and you think it will die quietly. Lies are stubborn. They root. They adapt. But when a lie is exposed with motion and sound and documentation, it convulses. "Call the sheriff!" someone shouted. Hank's voice cut through like a whistle. "Call them now!" The sheriff's deputy arrived faster than anyone expected, lights reflecting off windows like broken constellations. He took statements. He listened. He did his job with the firm patience of someone who sees too many human dramas to be surprised by any of them. The deputy asked questions that needed answers, and got them. He looked at Mark and the men with a look that wasn't interested in their clever words. Paperwork was collected. Photos were taken. The men who had thought they could borrow authority found that the law was heavy when it leaned on fraud. In the weeks that followed, subpoenas were issued. The county attorney took an interest. The HOA formed a committee that was finally forced to behave like a legal entity. Anger shifted into a slow, inevitable justice. The men were charged with impersonation, with attempting to deprive someone of property, with the litany of crimes that exist for precisely these purposes. Jonah tried to detach himself from triumphant images. There was no joy in victory when your life had been rattled. He thought less about revenge and more about repairing the places the false authority had torn. He started a neighborhood safety group with real certified officers, with training sessions, with legal oversight and transparency. He became a living testament to accountability. But revenge had not left the air. It arrived in small human acts as much as in the legal punishments. Hank, the old man who had rung the alarm, refused to retire from the park bench and filled his walks with brochures about rights. Liza, the neighbor who had given him the flyer, organized a community watch that actually worked with the sheriff's office. Sarah's column won an award. The men who had worn laminated badges had to give speeches to a council on ethics, and their faces turned an ashy color in the light of an auditorium where people asked sharp questions and kept microphones pointed at them like spears. For Jonah, revenge meant something different. It meant he could sit on his porch and watch Maddie play catch in the evening light without flinching at strangers in khakis. It meant he could teach her, as his father had taught him, how to be steady and to speak truth to power. He meant he could sit across from Sarah and help her write the follow-up, the legal piece that explained how the law would prevent such masquerades in the future. But yet there is a kind of revenge that waits in the margins, the kind that needs the dishonest to look at their own handiwork and find it hollow. Jonah had wanted to expose them so badly because he wanted them to feel the discomfort they'd given others. He wanted them to understand that the smallest acts of authority can wreck a life when misapplied. He had thought he would be satisfied when the sheriff stamped the last subpoena. But satisfaction arrived slowly, in the small miracles. A neighbor saying thank you without reserve. An HOA board that now balanced its power with minutes and proper votes. The sight of men who had pretended to be deputies learning to accept the concept of limitations on their influence. That was the revenge he allowed himself. A rebalanced street. A reclaimed peace. And then came the call that made the whole thing feel like a circle closing. One late night, as Jonah was closing the house and checking the live stream comments out of habit more than need, his phone vibrated. It was Hank. "They came by today," Hank said, "quiet as mice, wanted to offer an apology, wanted to hand me a card." "Who?" "Mark," Hank said. "He looked like he had been painted with rain. Said he was sorry, wanted to make amends. I told him to put it in the mailbox and walk away." I imagined Mark standing with a business card in his hand, a small rectangle of paper that used to buy him the illusion of authority. I imagined the apology being made and the man feeling the weight of words that don't fix broken things. Jonah didn't want to gloat. He felt only a dull amusement at the sight of the man offering a card like a child's apology. It was pathetic. It was human. It was enough. A week later, the county attorney contacted Jonah to say that charges would be filed. The men would be arraigned. He would be subpoenaed, of course. He was the victim and the star witness. Jonah prepared. He bought fresh shirts. He rehearsed the truth like a hymn. He did not gloat on the stand. He told the truth, and his truth was a kind of mercy. He had no desire to watch the men burn. He wanted them to learn. He wanted their spouses to know that a certain kind of arrogance had consequences. When the judge read the unanimous decision and the men were found guilty of impersonation, the sentence was community service and restitution and a mandatory course in community governance and ethics. It wasn't the jail time some had wanted, but it was a sentence that forced them into the very process they'd subverted. The final scene of the play arrived on an ordinary morning. Jonah walked his daughter to the bus stop. The neighborhood was quiet in a way victories tend to be, soft, unannounced. They passed the house of one of the men who had worn the badge. His mailbox had been replaced, his nameplate freshly polished. There was an awkwardness to the air. The man looked up when Jonah and Maddie passed and tipped his hat, a small, reluctant gesture. Jonah returned the nod and felt something loosen inside him, like a spring uncoiling. He thought about justice and about revenge and about the way small institutions can morph into terrible animals when left unguided. He thought about the long hours he'd spent poring over receipts and phone records and the way a community's courage had risen like a tide. He thought that sometimes the simplest weapon is a camera on a kitchen counter turned on at the right time. If the men had wanted revenge, they had aimed poorly. They had taught a lesson they could not unlearn, that power borrowed becomes counterfeit when used to intimidate, and communities remember. Days turned into months. The HOA rewrote its charter. Jonah's neighborhood became an odd model in the county, transparent, meticulous, and oddly proud of its imperfections. People would come to meetings now carrying not gossip, but minutes, not suspicion, but a willingness to hold records and to ask for warrants when they were needed. And in the center of it all, Jonah learned to teach Maddie that sometimes holding a rifle in a case is not an act of aggression, but of memory, of stewardship, of caretaking. He taught her how to speak with firmness and not to be afraid of authority when it does right. That night, at the anniversary of the raid, the community gathered in his yard for a block party. Sarah came with a camera and a cake. Hank brought a pie. Liza organized a corner for children and handed out glow sticks. Mark and the others were not invited, not because forgiveness was impossible, but because that night was about the people who had been harmed and survived.
Jonah stood near the string lights and watched his daughter chase a dog through the grass. He remembered the first moment, the phone's green light, the trembling in his hands, and the face of the man who had once believed a laminated badge made him a law unto himself. He had wanted to break them, to show them to the world for what they were. Instead, he had rebuilt, reshaped, and taught an entire block how to hold itself accountable. That, he thought quietly, was a sweeter revenge. He raised a plastic cup with a soft, proud smile, toasting in a small private ritual to witnesses, to paperwork, to the slow, grinding justice that often arrives through dull bureaucracy and the bright flash of a camera. The night hummed. Laughter rose like a song. Jonah set down the cup and let the warmth of human voices move through him. The imposters had tried to seize his guns. He had seized back the truth and let it shine. It was enough. The truth lives in small things, in the echo of a live stream, in a neighbor's hand pressing a phone to record, in a journalist's quiet insistence that facts matter. The men who pretended to be policemen had taught Jonah a lesson about the fragility of civility and the power of witnesses. In the end, the community reclaimed its story and stitched the rent into something stronger. The revenge was not a single thunderclap. It was a slow, careful administration, an unmaking of pretenses and the making of something better in their stead. The smell of grilled meat and laughter had barely faded from Jonah's yard when the shadows started to lengthen again. Justice, he'd learned, wasn't a straight road. It looped back, sometimes doubling on itself, sometimes circling like a wolf in tall grass. The HOA men were gone in the legal sense, fined, sentenced, humiliated in headlines. But they weren't gone in spirit. Some had moved away. Others stayed, trying to keep their heads low. Mark Low lingered. And men who linger with grudges are like coals under ash, harmless until someone kicks them. Jonah was tired. He wanted to move on. His daughter deserved nights without paranoia, mornings without questions about badges and SUVs. But he also knew the kind of men who pretend at authority don't learn humility overnight. They fester. They wait. It began quietly. One morning, Jonah found his tires slashed. No note, no witness. Just 4 flat reminders that some debts don't fade. Then a week later, the county clerk called to inform him his property taxes had tripled due to an adjustment. It was a clerical error, corrected within days, but Jonah could see the fingerprints of harassment in the margins. He didn't post everything online now. Not every insult or scare tactic. The live stream had served its purpose. The world already knew the truth. Now he was more selective. He saved his evidence for the right moments, like ammunition. The breaking point came one sweltering evening when he returned home to find a folded note wedged under his door. No signature, no seal. Just words, written in block capitals. "You humiliated us. We're not done. Give up the guns." Jonah sat at his kitchen table, staring at it, the note shaking in his hand. His daughter, Maddie, saw the tension in his face. "Dad?" she asked softly. He hid the paper under a placemat and forced a smile. That night, when Maddie was asleep, Jonah went to the shed. He checked the locks, checked the cameras, checked the rifle case. Then did something he hadn't done in years. He called an old army buddy, Marcus, the kind of man who answered the phone like a loaded weapon. "You sound like hell," Marcus said. "I might need a hand," Jonah admitted. "Not for fighting, for watching." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Send me the address, I'll be there." Within days, Marcus arrived. Broad, scarred, a man whose silence carried weight. He set up in Jonah's spare room, helped reinforce the cameras, and walked the neighborhood with Jonah at night, like 2 old sentries guarding a forgotten fort. Neighbors noticed. Some were grateful. Others whispered that Jonah was escalating things again. But Jonah didn't care. He knew what he saw in the eyes of men like Mark. It came to a head 2 Fridays later. Jonah had been streaming a Q&A about neighborhood safety, answering questions with Marcus off camera, when headlights flared outside. 3 figures in dark clothes moved up his driveway, one holding something long and black in his hands. He switched the camera to the outdoor feed. His viewers saw it in real time. Men in ski masks creeping toward the porch. The chat exploded. "Call the cops! They're back! We see it!" Jonah didn't panic. He whispered to Marcus, "Front door." They killed the lights inside, then Jonah raised his phone and angled it toward the window, narrating every move for the audience. 3 men on my property. No warrant. Masks. We are live." The figures froze when Jonah's porch lights suddenly blazed on, triggered by motion. For the first time, their faces flickered clear on camera. Not random intruders, not burglars, but Mark, unmistakable even with the mask slipping, and 2 of his fellow councilmen. One of them carried a crowbar. Jonah's voice, calm but cutting, filled the live stream. "Mark, I know it's you. Take one more step and the sheriff will see this footage before you can blink." The men hesitated. Mark spat on the ground and growled, "You ruined us. You think you won?" "I didn't win," Jonah said, opening the door just enough for the microphone to catch his voice. "The truth won, and you're losing more of it every second you stand there." Marcus moved into view, silent and broad, holding nothing but his phone angled like a shield. The intruders weren't expecting two men. They weren't expecting the world to watch in real time. Panic cracked their bravado. They bolted. Jonah didn't chase. He didn't need to. His cameras had caught everything. His live stream had recorded faces, voices, threats. By dawn, the footage was already circulating through news outlets. This time, the sheriff acted swiftly. Arrest warrants were issued within 48 hours. The charges stacked higher: breaking and entering, attempted intimidation, violation of probation. Mark and his men didn't walk out of the courthouse this time. They were led away in cuffs. The neighborhood changed after that. The HOA dissolved under pressure from the county. A new association was formed, this time overseen by the city, stripped of its bloated powers. Jonah was asked to run for president of the board. He declined. He said, "I've had enough battles." Instead, he suggested Norma, the sharp-tongued woman who had spoken truth at the town hall. She won by a landslide. For Jonah, revenge was not fire and fury. It was peace. It was seeing his daughter ride her bike down the street without him scanning every corner. It was coffee with Hank on quiet mornings. It was watching Marcus drive off one Sunday, leaving him with a firm handshake and the promise, "Call if they ever try again." The imposters had tried to strip him of dignity, property, and peace. In the end, they had stripped themselves of everything. Jonah's live stream, his stubborn patience, and his community's courage had turned their counterfeit authority into a joke the whole county remembered. Months later, at a barbecue much like the first, Jonah raised his cup again. "To truth," he said, and the neighbors echoed it back, their voices carrying like a shield. To truth. That was the sweetest revenge of all.